Welcome to Developing the Leader Within podcast, the podcast that brings you leadership insights from the brightest minds shaping our world. Join us as we dive into conversation with trailblazers, innovators, and change makers, spanning every corner of the globe. Get ready to explore new perspectives, gain actionable insights, and become the leader the world needs today. Unleash your potential. Tune into Developing the Leader Within podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Let's embark on this transformative journey together. Developing the Leader Within podcast, leading beyond limits.
Welcome back, everyone. If you haven't subscribed, please do so right now, as it'll help us getting our show to others and help us get to our next milestone. Make sure to catch us streaming on Parade Deck, on Roku, and Amazon Fire TV on the Purpose Place Network, and catch our exclusive members-only content Going Deeper Within on the Lions Guide Academy. Today, we are speaking with Ashley Bright. Ashley is a public speaking and communications coach and a fellow podcaster, also a fellow outlier. He is on a mission to help purpose-driven leaders break through barriers and gain support for their ideas. Ashley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, my friend. Great to see you.
And great to see you. I love the opportunity to speak with you because we're going to be speaking, folks, about Command the Room, public speaking secrets every leader should know. And I'll tell you, Ashley, I said this before, I've seen leaders really take public speaking to heart and really own their presence and their influence. And then I've also seen leaders that have failed to invest in this area and catastrophe, right? But before we get into all of that content and exploration, tell us a little bit about you.
As you said, I'm a public speaking and communications coach. I teach growth-minded leaders how to speak with confidence, clarity, and impact, so they can, as you said, command the room, command attention, and ultimately be inspiring people to take action. I'm very proud of the fact that my clients have raised upwards of $50 million, a little bit more, to support their ideas simply by improving their communication skills. And I'm working on a few things right now that I'm gonna throw out there. I've got a video training platform that I'm excited about launching soon, so I can have more people learn these skills, and it gets me one step closer to my goal of empowering 1 million people to be better, more effective communicators. So,
folks, when we talk about leaders, we often think of the point of reference from command, right? Saying something and then having somebody do something. But Ashley, how can leaders use public speaking? Because that's something that a lot of folks are afraid of. Public speaking to build credibility and increase their influence within their organization or communities.
well, it's a big question there. Little package that you open up. There's a lot going on there, but I think it's interesting because when we think of public speaking, I think people often think of, I'm getting up on stage, I'm getting in front of a room, and obviously that is a big component of quote unquote public speaking. But as you've mentioned a few times, as a leader, you're really in a position of essentially, there's a variation of public speaking throughout your day, throughout your job, throughout your week. And so it's really, I actually did a post about this a couple weeks ago. I did a podcast about it as well, on executive presence and having that level of awareness throughout your day with all your interactions, and getting to a point where it's really second nature for you. And I'm sure you've seen this in your experience in the military, that individuals that they just commanded a level of respect and trust from the people that they were working with. And ultimately, having that ability as a quote unquote public speaker is critical to that component of it. Because obviously, there's going to be moments when you're in front of a group and you're sharing new approaches, new ideas. Maybe you're dealing with a challenging situation. You're launching new initiatives. These are all moments to build that trust, use that authority that you have in certain ways to help move the conversation forward. And so thinking of it as a one-off when you're on stage, I think really limits the potential of what being a great communicator can do for you in your professional and personal personal environments.
Absolutely. Now, Ashley, we've all had leaders that undoubtedly we've said in one way or another, man, that leader was great until they opened their mouth. Right? There's just some of these things that people and speaking, communicating, it's just one of these things that people have a challenge with. Either they don't dominate the language as well, they don't dominate their thoughts as well. And so there are a lot of mistakes that leaders actually make. So, what are the most common communication mistakes leaders make, and how can they correct them to better connect with their audience?
Yeah, there's a few there. There's quite a few actually, but I think specifically as a leader, it's I was going to say it's counterintuitive in the topic of public speaking and communication, but I think what I've witnessed and when I work with business leaders, one of the things that is a big detractor is feeling that you have to speak before you've really listened to what's going on. And it's such a powerful tool to be able to have that awareness to listen. In fact, you brought up, we were in our pre-conversation talking about Lindsay Dowd, and when I had her on my podcast, it was one of the things she talked about is the power as a leader, especially as a new leader in an organization, doing what she referred to as a listening tour, going around, talking to people, building those relationships and learning because they're going to have that insight. And so I think one of the critical things is not listening, not taking that time to really pay attention and get those insights. I think the other thing I see oftentimes, and it's probably related to that first point, and I think there's an element of fear and anxiety that leaders don't want to talk about and don't want to share, but they over-index on their authority, meaning that they think it is this, I'm going to sort of lay down the law, I'm going to speak my mind, I'm going to do these things because I'm the leader, I'm the boss. And I think it comes from a place of fear and imposter syndrome many times, but it immediately becomes something that puts everyone on guard, especially if you're a new leader in a new environment. And so I think, again, having that awareness to listen and recognizing that just because you're in that leadership position doesn't necessarily guarantee you compliance or trust building. And so the flip side of that, I think, to your point about how do we counter that or how do we improve those things, is I think leading with a real awareness and sense of empathy and a level of emotional intelligence that I'm happy to hear more people talking about the need for, because that empathy or emotional intelligence, however you want to frame it, is at the crux of great leadership, because it is about being aware of what's going on in the room. How are people feeling? How are they responding? Potentially, I need to change the tone or some of the words I'm using. And I've actually just recently did I was an MC for an event last week, and being an MC is you are the leader of that event, and it's obviously I knew the things I was going to say, I knew the key points I wanted to hit, but at the same time I had to be aware of the energy in the room and what the audience was saying and what was going on with the different speakers and things of that nature to really, back to your original title, command the room. You're very much sort of, you've got your hands on everything, you're aware of what's going on, and so emotional intelligence plays an incredibly valuable role in that.
So powerful. And I hope folks that are listening, if you've made some certain mistakes in that area, that these will help, but also that you would consider some of those elements that are not necessarily in communication. The listening is one of the biggest things as leaders that we have to employ. I started podcasting, and that first couple of weeks, I did a survey, and it has not changed in all these 6 years. Leaders need to listen. And it was back then and it's still today, 6 years later. So, very important point there, especially when you're trying to communicate effectively in groups and as a leader. Now, Ashley, I know that you speak about storytelling and the power there. A lot of leaders fail to connect with their people because they just don't know how to tell the story. And so, in your experience, what role does storytelling play in leadership communication, and how can leaders harness it to inspire action?
Sure. I always, when that topic comes up, I'm always reminded of a quote from Gary Vaynerchuk, where he said that storytelling is one of the most underrated skills in business and leadership. And I think it's bang on, because I think unfortunately our culture tends to look at emotion, especially in business and leadership, as something that we should not be expressing. We should not be communicating. It potentially could show weakness. And storytelling is an incredibly powerful tool for leaders to show that emotion, demonstrate that emotional intelligence in a way that still commands respect and attention, because storytelling is a universal human quality. It's something that's in our DNA. If you go back to our ancestors, sitting around the cliched kind of campfire, trying to stay alive, storytelling was ultimately how they survived, because through that they were learning, where can we get water, where can we find food, where should we be concerned about potential enemies or threats. And so storytelling is really hardwired into who we are. And so as a leader, if you can leverage that skill and have, I always refer to them with my clients as back pocket stories. And so if you can develop 3 to 5 back pocket stories that are obviously authentic and real and true to you, but they have an arc of that story where at the end of it, we're tying back to, as a leader, something that is around, motivating your team, overcoming a challenge that you faced or surpassing something. And I mean, those can be stories from when you were in Little League or Boy Scouts or something, in your past. But the thing is that it demonstrates to your listener, to your team, that the very first thing you talked about, which was emotional intelligence and empathy. So if you can feel what's going on in the room and maybe there's an uncertainty about what we're going to do, and you use that opportunity as a leader to share a little anecdote about something that happened to you that helps them feel that they're heard and they understand that you understand where they're coming from, it is a very, very powerful way of building that trust and that bond. And as I said earlier, demonstrating a level of, you could call it vulnerability, emotional intelligence that still keeps you in command of the room and command of the space.
And a powerful tool to connect with people, right? To
Absolutely.
say, hey, I know this by experience. This is what happened. And then it makes you a little more human, I say, when you can tell a story where people can say, whoa, I was in a similar situation. Oh my goodness, I can't believe he or she went through that, and look at them now, right? It makes you a tangible asset to the workforce, to those that you are leading, if you're a leader, and you can tell the story right. Now, talk about resonating or connecting. How can leaders tailor their message to resonate with diverse audiences without losing authenticity or clarity?
Well, I think the fact that stories, if they're, well, I was going to say if they're done right, but I think any story you're sharing, that should be rooted in a truth and an authenticity about the experience that you're sharing. And by that definition, it's often a universal truth. And so when I look at the components of storytelling, one of the key things is authentic emotions. And so these are things that we all share. And so depending, on what audience you're speaking to, the primary thread of your story can remain the same because there is a universality to it. Now, depending on the diversity of the audience or diverse audiences, meaning I'm speaking to a particular group one day and then I'm speaking to a different group another day, that's where having those back pocket stories that I mentioned become valuable. And the reason I've referred to them and having 3 to 5 is that ultimately what you want is a story that's specific to each situation. And so, for example, as a leader, I might have one of my back pocket stories might be my origin story. Why did I start this business? Why did I start this organization? Why did I start my career on this path? That can be a really powerful one to rally support from your team and get them excited about the mission that we're on to solve a problem here. Another one might be customer facing. And so if I know I speak to a certain audience or industry on a regular basis, do I have a story that relates to that audience? Because the other piece of it is, aside from authentic emotions, is relatable characters. And so when I'm telling a story, is the character that's in this story, the primary character, are they someone my audience can relate to? So if I'm speaking to a bunch of industry reps, in a particular field that I'm in, am I talking about a story and a character that they can relate to? So that it's not someone foreign or that they can't see themselves. Because that's the thing, we always, that authentic emotion pulls you in. And then if it's someone we can relate to, like, wow, this person's going through a similar struggle to me, then immediately we're pulled in. And I haven't touched on this a little bit. I haven't touched on this yet, but I talk about this a lot in my workshops. Storytelling, the reason it's so powerful and why it is the first step is because our brain really has two different systems in it. There's a researcher and an author named Daniel Kahneman that's written and studied this. And there's system one and system two. And system one is that part of the brain it operates independently. It operates involuntarily. And so this is your regulating your temperature and your breathing and your digestion and things like this. It's also where fight or flight lives. It's that primal part of the brain. And so it responds to emotion and story. And so if you've ever sat through a meeting or a presentation where it's just boring and you're confused and overwhelmed, what's happened is someone has tried to skip system one and they've gone to system two, which is where the brain is processing information and complexity. And so system two doesn't like to engage unless system one has said, hey, this is interesting. You should pay attention to this. And then system two will kick in and go, all right, I'm ready. Throw me some stats or some data now. I'm ready for it. But so many people that just jump right to stats, and system two is like, we're not paying attention. We're not listening. We're not engaged. I mean, system one, and that's through storytelling, that's through emotion, is the key. It just opens the door to everything that you want to do and gets people interested and sitting on the edge of their seat. And now, when you drop these powerful statistics around the opportunity or the growth or the revenue, it actually lands in system two and resonates because you got them interested first.
Yeah, I love that because a lot of times we fail to acknowledge the science behind things, right? We are complicated beings, but there is a science that allows us to connect better. And as leaders, you have to be up on what it is that truly allows folks to resonate with you, your message, your vision, all these orders that you may be barking at folks. Why are they doing it? Why should I be invested? And these are some of the ways to do so. Now, we know if I thought of the gym and my physique and I'm like, okay, I want to be this and that and the other, I have to put in some work. It has to be repeated and it has to be overtime for me to get to like that Mr. Clean behind you, right? So, what daily or weekly practices do you recommend for leaders who want to sharpen their speaking and communication skills over time?
Yeah, it's a great analogy. I use it often. The physical well-being and what it takes, and it's like if you want to be sort of Dwayne the Rock Johnson or Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's not going to happen overnight. And the wonderful thing about communication and executive presence is that we see someone who's got it, and it feels unattainable. But just like that incredible body that someone has, or those muscles, it took time. It took that repetition and that commitment. And so communication is no different. And so one of the things that I recommend, because I hear this from clients often, where we talk about the power of storytelling, and they'll say, well, I don't really have any stories, or I'm not sure how they relate. And first thing I recommend is carrying a small, what I refer to as like a story journal. And it's something, I'm looking for mine right here. I've got it. Oh, here it is. Um, you know, just a little something that slides in your pocket, or a little bag. And the idea is that throughout your day, you become aware of those little moments, those interactions, those funny things you maybe saw, or something you thought of, and you jot those down. And the other thing too is, I find that through this exercise, you also start to remember experiences you've had in the past, and you'll jot those down. And the idea is that you now have a repository of potential stories. And that's a valuable first step. So now I've got a bunch of stories to pull from. And then starting to develop those, I refer to them again as those back pocket stories for different situations. And really looking at, what was the thing I learned from this? What was the highlight? What was the thing I had to overcome? What was the challenge? And how do I relate that back to something that's going on in my organization or with my team? And then starting to put together a basic structure for that. And the thing with stories that I think is wonderful, you don't have to have it, you're not sort of creating the next Star Wars every time you're making a story. Instead, it's really just, you want this beginning, this middle, and this end, and showing transition. And so it could be super simple. And I always do this with my story journal, where I write, a basic idea, like, oh, there was that time I fell off my bike and blah, blah, blah. And then I'll put a couple bullets. And so it's like, kind of, what was the situation? What was the thing I learned? What was the takeaway? And then I will start to rehearse those or practice them, and looking at, like, can I do this in 30 seconds? What if I have a little bit longer? Can I get more descriptive? One of the things we didn't talk about was specific details. Those are things that create visual pictures for people when you're telling a story. And so if I say, that sitting under the blinding neon lights, or sitting in the DMV under those fluorescent lights, people start to form a picture. That's why the very famous opening, it was a dark and stormy night, because it immediately puts you in this place. So where I'm going with this is, you capture the stories in the journal, you start to kind of delineate them a little bit in terms of structure, then you start to practice them over time, starting to kind of fill them up, round them out, like add some detail, add some character, add some emotion. And then it's really just a matter of starting to practice that. One of the things that I recommend is, you can do mirror practice, where you are watching yourself. What am I doing with my body? What am I doing with my hands? What am I doing with my facial expressions? But a more powerful way, and this is actually a great tool, is recording yourself. And so get your phone out, set it up, and record yourself telling one of your stories. Or let's say you're hosting a meeting next week, and you're like, well, how am I going to open this? And so practice your opening. And the key with that is that after you've recorded it, and it should be a minute, couple minutes, something a little substantial, so you can kind of get in the flow of it. And then what you want to do is listen to it. Okay, don't watch it, listen to it first, because you'll start to hear what's going on with your voice and the words that you're using. And am I repeating things? Am I being clear? Am I being succinct? Am I using my pitch and my tone and my volume appropriately? So you'll hear that. And so there's homework where you'll be jotting down, like, okay, God, I keep saying, okay, I better fix that. And so you've got a little homework there. And then the next thing is, you're going to watch it without the audio. So now you're seeing, what's going on with my body. I keep doing this weird thing with my hand. I don't know, don't know why. Or I keep resting on my hip, or whatever it is. And so you again have a little checklist of, like, okay, I got to work on that. I got to work on that. I got to work on that. And now watch the whole thing together. And so now you've got a little homework assignment. And so you start practicing that. And this is the thing, this is where the workout metaphor is a great one, because if you're trying to deal with these things all at once up on stage or in front of your audience, you're overwhelmed and you're in your head, you're not present. Whereas if you've been practicing over time, and so let's say I'm going to do this time through, I'm going to work on that and avoiding it and just being happy with the pause and holding the pause. And so I start to do that. And then I'm, okay, that's getting a little bit better. And then the next couple times through, I'm going to work on this hand thing I keep doing. And so you're slowly breaking it down and forming new muscle memory, if you will. And ultimately you get to a place where, okay, I've dealt with the I've dealt with this, I've dealt with that, I'm feeling really comfortable. And so now I've kind of started to internalize that. And you can do that with stories, you can do that with the opening of a talk, you can do that with any aspect of your communication. And so those are some ways that I recommend. And then just on the day-to-day, really being aware of listening to conversations when you're getting a coffee, listening to what's going on in the room, and becoming very aware. And the last thing I'll say is learning how to ask questions. That component of listening is so powerful, but then how do you follow up? How do you ask more questions and gather information? And so I think on your day-to-day, you're out getting coffee, you're out doing other things, practice, ask some questions beyond how's it going? Because to me, how's it going is kind of like going to a networking event, like, well, what do you do? And it immediately kind of just, I think, drops the energy versus like, what have you been working on this week that's really got you excited? Oh, let me tell you. And suddenly I've changed the trajectory of the conversation. So I threw a bunch of things at you there, but I think keeping track of your stories, journaling, starting to practice those and being aware of what your body and your voice are doing, and then listening more intently and asking questions.
Well, wonderful recipe, folks, for you to get well built. You'll be the Arnold of public speaking,
There you go.
the Arnold of just influencing your group. So thank you for sharing that. All valuable and doable, which is the great thing, folks. If you want doable things, here it goes. Now, actually, you speak about this, you have a podcast, you do trainings, you do public speaking yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
what do you have coming up, and where can the viewer or the listener follow or support you?
Certainly. Thank you. So, as I mentioned, I have a podcast. I have two podcasts. And so the first is called the Impact Tribe Podcast. And that happens every other Thursday, where I am interviewing people that are really bringing about a positive change and a positive impact to the world. And that is available. I've got a YouTube channel, which is at the Impact Tribe Podcast. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok under those same names. And so that's where you can see them, you can learn about them, and I would love some support there. I also have every other Thursday, I have the communication blueprint, which is focused very much on giving people actionable, tangible skills that they can use to improve their communication on the daily. And so that consists of a newsletter every 2 weeks, and then a live stream where I will get into detail about the topic for that week's newsletter and answer questions. And that you can access through my LinkedIn profile, as well as my YouTube channel, which is at Ashley_Bright. And beyond that, you asked what's coming up. I mentioned very briefly in the beginning that I have a video training platform I'm working on. And so excited about that. Hopefully that's going to be out in the next month or so. And that my goal there on my mission to empower 1 million people is creating something that is both economically accessible. It's a low price point, but also something you can do on your own at your own pace. We're all busy, but I think improving your communication is a priority and should be a priority, because we've talked a lot about leaders. And just to be clear, communication and the power of being able to communicate is necessary for everyone, because this is about personal relationships, this is about personal experiences, career advancement, and professional opportunities as well. So learning how to do this better it's a win-win all around.
Well, I agree. And folks, we'll have all the links mentioned for you to be able to get a hold of Ashley and all that he's doing. And today's episode is sponsored by the Global Trends magazine, the Outlier Project, Fantail Services, Southern Sweet and Sassy Coffee, Ascend Meditations, and Chop AI. And if you've enjoyed this episode and learned something interesting about the topic covered today, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and let us know by leaving a comment. Tune in next week for another episode where we dissect leadership from another angle. And as we like to end the show, success to you.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate the opportunity.